Okay, picture this for a second. You're just driving down a regular modern American highway. You're passing by farms, some dense forests, a few strip malls, maybe a city skyline in the distance. Standard stuff, right? But what if I told you that just beneath that asphalt, hiding right under the soil of our everyday infrastructure, lies a massive, completely forgotten world? Seriously, today on The Explainer, we are going to uncover some jaw-dropping evidence of enormous ancient cities, mysterious monuments, and highly sophisticated civilizations that thrived right here in North America.
So let's dive straight into this. What if some of the absolute greatest cities in American history actually existed thousands of years before America even became a country? We have this tendency to think that American history kicked off on a very specific date, 1776, signing the Declaration of Independence, the whole 9 yards. But today we're going to completely shatter that misconception using nothing but hard archaeological evidence.
All right, part one, America before the United States. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to zoom way out. The United States, as we know it today, is honestly just a very, very recent political creation on a landmass that has this incredibly deep, rich, and complex human history. I mean, look at this timeline. Over 13,000 years ago, we're seeing the Clovis culture and evidence of some of the earliest arrivals to the continent. Thousands of years ago, we see the development of widespread agriculture. A few centuries ago, we've got the rise of massive pre-Columbian cities. And then, way over on the far edge of this timeline, just a tiny, tiny sliver, is 1776. Our entire modern era is basically just a blink of an eye compared to the millennia of human history that came before it. And here is something really important to understand. These early Americans didn't just passively survive out in the wild. They literally engineered the landscapes. They managed incredibly complex ecosystems and adapted to some wildly diverse environments, everything from freezing coastlines to scorching deserts to super dense forests. This absolutely proves that these communities were deeply knowledgeable and highly adaptable. They were not primitive by any stretch. They were outright masters of their environments. Moving right along to Section 2, the rise of ancient cities and massive urban centers. Let's talk about the Adena and Hopewell traditions for a minute. These were ancient indigenous cultures based primarily in the Ohio region, and they were renowned for doing something pretty incredible. They built massive, perfectly precise geometric earthworks and burial mounds. We're talking about giant ceremonial centers that span acres and acres, shaped into flawless octagons, squares, and circles. Which naturally leads us to a profound mystery, right? How in the world did people, without any modern surveying equipment, pull off enormous geometric earthworks with such intense mathematical and astronomical precision? I mean, some of these earthworks perfectly align with complex moon cycles that take over 18 years to complete. And they did all of this entirely without the help of a smartphone calendar or GPS tools. They pulled off these incredible feats of landscape planning and organized labor using sheer ingenuity and generations of careful astronomical observation. But the brilliant engineering definitely didn't stop in Ohio. Out in the incredibly harsh, bone-dry desert of the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblonians built something truly spectacular. I want you to imagine standing in Chaco Canyon centuries ago. You wouldn't be looking at an empty desert. You'd be totally surrounded by massive, multi-story stone architecture. You would see perfectly constructed ancient roads stretching out across the horizon, connecting a thriving hub of trade and ceremonial life in what is literally one of the toughest environments on the entire continent. Now, if you want a real mind-blower, let's look at what is probably the most dramatic centerpiece of ancient North America, a place that completely upends how we view the continent. Enter Cahokia. Located near the Mississippi River, right outside present-day St. Louis, Cahokia was a massive urban center. It had sprawling neighborhoods, complex agricultural systems, and these enormous earthen monuments. The most famous one, Monk's Mound, has a footprint so massive it is a literal marvel of ancient engineering. Thousands, that is the magic number you need to focus on here. Thousands and thousands of people lived, traded, farmed, and gathered around these enormous earthen monuments at Cahokia. This was a buzzing, heavily populated, diverse metropolis centuries before European colonization even started. Which brings us nicely to Section 3, Ancient Science and Engineering. Look, to see that advanced engineering absolutely doesn't require modern machinery. You just have to look at their vast knowledge systems. Just run down the list. Crop domestication and agriculture allowed their populations to completely boom. They had complex water management and irrigation that basically turned deserts into oases. They built towering multi-story stone architecture. They used precise astronomy to create seasonal calendars, and their advanced toolmaking and craftsmanship rivaled literally anything else going on in the world at the time. And all of this ingenuity fueled a vast continent-spanning trade network. It's like an ancient superhighway of commerce. We find copper being used for tools and ornaments thousands of miles from its source. Marine shells used for jewelry end up deep, deep inland. Obsidian, which they used for incredibly razor-sharp tools, was transported across vast mountain ranges. So you have all these materials, along with ideas, art, and new technology, constantly changing hands across this incredibly vibrant, connected continent. So what happened? Section 4, The Great Decline Mystery. It's honestly one of the most provocative cold cases in American archaeology. Why exactly did massive urban centers like Cahokia and Chaco Canyon eventually decline? Now, I want to be incredibly clear here because there's a lot of misinformation out there. These civilizations did not simply vanish into thin air. History isn't a magic trick, right? When archaeologists actually dig into the evidence, the numbers reveal a much more fascinating process of human adaptation. About 35% of the evidence points to severe climate shifts and extended droughts that basically made large-scale farming impossible. Then another 30% suggests political reorganization. Essentially, people deciding the massive, centralized city structure just wasn't working for them anymore, so they decentralized. 20% indicates changing trade networks, and about 15% points to intense local resource pressures. So it wasn't some sudden, dramatic disappearance. It was a highly complex, highly strategic reorganization of their societies to survive changing times. Look, we've all seen it online. It's so easy to fall for popular internet myths. Stuff like ancient aliens, mythical lost civilizations, Atlantis, sudden magical disappearances. It's easy clickbait. But when you look side by side at the actual archaeological evidence, which points to climate variability, migration, and smart political adaptation, you realize something. The real, evidence-based story of human resilience and ingenuity right here on this continent is so much more fascinating than the myths anyway. Finally, Section 5, The Story Survives Today Through Modern Communities. Now, entering the modern era, we do have to factually acknowledge the reality of European arrival. It was undeniably a catastrophic upheaval. It brought devastating infectious diseases, intense warfare, and forced displacement. It was an era that violently and dramatically transformed the North American landscape and the people living on it forever. But the story absolutely does not end with that contact. The path from that catastrophic event to today is entirely defined by resilience. It was followed by intense indigenous resistance and adaptation. It was followed by the fierce, dedicated preservation of languages, art, and traditions against incredible odds. And ultimately, it leads to their continued survival as active modern nations today. It is absolutely vital to take away from this that indigenous peoples are not just figures from the distant past. They are very much living modern communities right now. Which leaves us with this final, kind of haunting thought to wrap up on. The greatest mystery may not be what happened to ancient America. It may be how much of its story is still waiting beneath our feet. I want you to think about that next time you take a walk through your hometown or drive down the highway. What ancient history, what completely forgotten metropolis, or brilliant piece of engineering is buried right beneath you, just waiting to be uncovered? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.